Mike, tell me what consumers need to know when they buy renewable energy.
Well, I think it's important that consumers understand exactly what they're getting. The electrons that actually come out of your light socket aren't going to be any different. Very often, what consumers are purchasing are those electrons. And in addition, something called a renewable energy certificate, a REC, that essentially represents the so-called green attributes of a wind farm or other renewable power generator somewhere else in the country.
So what should consumers know when they buy renewable electricity?
Well, I think they want to know what they're getting and what they're not getting. What they're getting typically are what they always get, power, and then something called a REC. What they're not necessarily getting are more wind farms. They're not necessarily paying for the construction of solar panels or ensuring that more of that exists in the world. And I think many consumers are a little bit confused about that, understandably.
What about the questions of accountability? Is there enough oversight of these RECs?
Well, I think particularly in the voluntary markets, oversight continues to be a problem. It's not that the companies that sell these RECs aren't trying, but they have a long ways to go.
What do you mean by that? Is there enough accountability that people don't know what they're getting?
Well, I'd separate, there are two issues. One is, do people know what they're getting? And that, I think, the onus is on the consumer to really be an active, informed consumer when they buy this kind of green power from their utility. But a separate question is whether the RECs are properly accounted for, whether they're being sold twice, for instance, once to a so-called compliance buyer, someone who has to, a utility that has to comply with an RPS, and another time to a consumer that's buying green power.
So what do consumers need to know when they buy green power?
Well, they should try to find out as much as they can to understand where the REC is coming from that is the green attribute of the power they're buying. Is it coming from a wind farm? Is it coming from some kind of renewable power that might count as renewable in some parts of the country but not where they live, that they might have real concerns about? Biomass is one such power source in some parts of the country. They want to make sure that the REC is actually retired and that someone is paying attention to be sure that it's not sold twice.
Mike, is there enough government oversight over RECs?
Well, I think right now there's very little government oversight over the kind of RECs that a consumer would buy in their green power. And there have been various pushes to increase the level of oversight and a lot of industry resistance, I think, to creating it. Arguably, there's not enough. I think that the consumer, particularly one that doesn't want to spend a lot of time worrying about where his or her green power is coming from, could benefit from someone who doesn't have an interest in making money, making sure that their power is actually what it seems to be.
What about, Mike, green power in terms of what consumers know? Do consumers actually know what they're getting when they sign up for a utility that says they're going to sell them 100% green power?
Very often they don't, and it can be quite hard, quite difficult to figure out, even for the interested consumer, what they're getting. And I think that's part of the problem. That's a place where more government oversight, more transparent registration of the origins of RECs could really be beneficial.
The concern really is that people don't even know where these RECs are coming from. Is there a concern out there that these RECs are not being retired or even sold twice?
I think in the absence of greater transparency, there has to be that concern. Whenever you have a product that is very opaque, confusing, kind of intangible, and you don't have some way of making sure that you're getting what you pay for, there's going to be that concern. And so really it's in the interests of everyone, the consumer and the people that would like to sell these RECs to consumers, to push for greater transparency.
You've seen some of the language that these utilities use. Are they being honest with their consumers? Are they being accurate?
I think they're being accurate in a strict sense, but they could certainly disclose more and inform their consumers. Part of the reason that an individual buys a green power from their utility is that they're interested in where their electricity is coming from, and it's sort of a teachable moment for the supplier of that electricity.
Mike, what about how utilities market this green power? Could they do a better job about telling consumers what they're really getting?
Yeah, I think they could. The utilities, by and large, are accurate in their marketing claims about the product. But this is the kind of thing, a rec that's extremely opaque and hard to understand for a consumer who's used to just paying a bill for electricity. And the consumers that want to buy recs are perhaps those that are the most interested in understanding more about where their electricity is coming from and making better choices. And so it's kind of a teachable moment for the utilities. And unfortunately, it's often the case that the utilities use this teachable moment as more of an opportunity to make kind of vague marketing claims about the environmental benefits of their power, rather than an opportunity to help consumers understand where the good power comes from and where the dirtier power comes from.
So this is really feel-good marketing.
It can be, and too often is.
Mike, as utilities buy more green power, are we going to see the controversy over these recs go away?
Yeah, well, I think the need for them is going to go away. As the utilities become more green, as they adopt as part of their normal business more of the technologies that these recs are helping, at least to some extent, to support, I think the consumer is going to see maybe have less of a need to act independently of what their power company is doing all of the time. As we eventually in the country impose some limits on carbon emissions, as the RPSs are fulfilled around the country in the different states, and there's more and more renewable power as part of the mix, I think that people's perceptions of electric power may change. They may come to view it as more green than they currently do, and so their desire to kind of opt out of the current supply of electricity that they might otherwise receive will be reduced.
But in the meantime, it sounds like the consumer needs to be more educated and there needs to be more government oversight.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way to get this right, to get voluntary recs right, is to really make efforts to educate the consumers about what they're buying and to create some structure where there's a lot more transparency about where recs come from and who uses them, so that you don't get either mistakes or fraud happening where recs are used twice, where they have unclear origins, or where they aren't actually retired after they're sold once and used.
Mike, are all recs created equal?
I mean, no, they're not. And increasingly, there are recs on the market that are, to some extent, independently verified by some neutral third party, and to some extent more transparent, so that a consumer that buys electric power that has a rec associated with it could go and look and see where that at least the rec came from, and ensure that it's been retired, that it's not going to be used again. And I think there's at least some positive movement in that direction toward greater transparency, toward greater accountability. We're not probably where we need to be yet, and we're probably not getting there or moving in that direction quite fast enough.
Mike, when a consumer buys a rec, do they really know where it came from in all cases?
Not in all cases. I think the picture is mixed. There are some recs where there is accountability, where there is a neutral third party that's making sure that the rec is generated at an appropriate kind of wind farm or solar plant, and is ensuring that the rec is retired after it's sold. And those are kind of the two key attributes that you want to be sure of. And there's some kinds of recs where the consumer, the individual consumer, can go and check and make sure that what they got was the real deal. That's not always the case. I think there's a trend in that direction on the part of the industry. We're not where we need to be in this market yet, and we're probably not heading in that direction quite as fast as many would like.
Does the government have to step in and provide that kind of accountability?
It's certainly one way to do it, and probably the quickest way, but there are certainly examples of voluntary self-regulation that have been successful. There are lots of cases where they haven't been.